daughter's been missing since this morning. She's 8 months pregnant.
The FBI is now joining the search for a missing California woman who is 8 months pregnant.
Her husband reported her missing after he returned from a fishing trip, a trip he took by himself.
Please bring our daughter home.
You know in your gut that something bad has happened.
Are you in any way connected to Laci's disappearance?
I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance.
There are 2 bodies found in Richmond, California.
Laci and her unborn child did not deserve to die.
Scott Peterson was arrested for the murder of his wife.
We, the jury, further find the degree of the murder to be that of the first degree.
There was nobody in that courtroom that had a dry eye. Scott didn't cry.
For Scott Peterson, his story is what matters.
Unlock the darkest stories and unravel the mysteries with Dark Crime Box. Subscribe now and step inside the world of true crime like never before.
Before we begin, if you value deep, carefully researched true crime stories told with respect and gravity, take a moment to support Dark Crime Box. Like this video, share it with someone who follows true crime, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. The water was cold, restless, and unforgiving as it carried secrets toward the edge of the San Francisco Bay. In April of 2003, the tide did what tides always do. It returned what had been taken. A body surfaced along the shoreline, unrecognizable at first glance, altered by months beneath the water. Nearby, the remains of an unborn child washed ashore separately, fragile and devastating proof that 2 lives had ended long before they were found. What investigators would see next would ignite years of argument, speculation, and one of the most controversial claims in modern American criminal history. This was the end of Laci Peterson's disappearance. But it was not the end of the story. From the moment her remains were discovered, the condition of Laci's body became a focal point of intense scrutiny. The ocean had not been gentle. Exposure to saltwater, marine life, and time had transformed evidence into something difficult to interpret. Certain injuries, certain absences, raised questions that would later be seized upon by the defense. Among them was a claim that would echo across courtrooms, documentaries, and internet forums for decades. The suggestion that Laci Peterson had not been killed by a person at all, but by a shark. It was a shocking assertion, one that cut against the emotional weight of the case and the narrative already forming in the public mind. And yet, once introduced, it refused to disappear. To understand why such a claim could even exist, it's necessary to go back. Back to the calm suburban streets of Modesto, California, where Laci Peterson was last seen alive. She was 8 months pregnant, preparing for Christmas, moving through her days with the quiet anticipation of impending motherhood. Her disappearance on December 24, 2002, sent shockwaves through her community. Posters appeared, candlelight vigils formed, news vans lined the streets, and at the center of it all stood her husband, Scott Peterson. In the early days, the story appeared heartbreakingly simple. A pregnant woman vanished. A husband pleaded for her return. The nation watched, hoping for a miracle that never came. But as days turned into weeks, inconsistencies surfaced. Investigators followed digital trails, financial records, witness sightings, and movements that painted a far darker picture. Long before the bodies were found, suspicion had already hardened around Scott Peterson. Still, when the ocean finally gave up its dead, it complicated everything. Laci's remains were incomplete, heavily decomposed, and marked by damage consistent with prolonged submersion. Medical examiners faced an impossible task: separating trauma inflicted before death from destruction caused by the environment after. No definitive cause of death could be established. There were no clear signs of strangulation, no conclusive evidence of stabbing, no bullet wounds. The sea had erased much of what investigators typically rely on. It was within this uncertainty that the shark theory emerged. Experts testified that marine scavengers, including sharks common to the Bay Area, could account for certain injuries and missing tissue. This was not presented as proof of an attack occurring while Laci was alive, but as an explanation for postmortem damage. However, in the hands of the defense, that distinction blurred. Suggestions were made carefully, deliberately, that a shark attack could explain the condition of the remains, and by extension, introduce doubt about how Laci died and who was responsible. It was a theory built not on definitive evidence, but on absence, on what could not be proven rather than what could. Investigators, prosecutors, and forensic specialists countered this claim with equal force. They pointed to the lack of shark bite patterns, the improbability of a fatal shark attack going unreported in those waters, and the overwhelming circumstantial evidence placing Scott Peterson at the very marina where Laci and her unborn son would later be found. The shark explanation, they argued, addressed decomposition, not guilt. But doubt has power, and once spoken aloud, it spreads. In the middle of the story, as you listen, consider how easily uncertainty can be transformed into alternative narratives. If you're finding this case as disturbing as it is complex, help Dark Crime Box continue telling these stories by liking the video and subscribing. Your support keeps these deep dives possible. The ocean, indifferent and silent, became an unwilling accomplice in confusion, concealed timelines, it erased injuries, and it gave rise to theories that continue to resurface years later. But the question remains, when evidence is damaged beyond recognition, where does truth end and speculation begin? As the investigation moved forward, authorities would argue that the Real story was not written in teeth marks or missing tissue, but in choices made long before Laci ever reached the water. Choices that would soon place Scott Peterson at the center of a relentless pursuit for justice. And yet, even now, the image lingers. The vast, dark water, the unseen creatures beneath the surface, and the unsettling idea that nature itself might be blamed for a crime many believe was calculated and human. At the end of this chapter, one thought refuses to fade. When a body tells an incomplete story, who decides what the silence means? The investigation did not begin at the shoreline. It began in the quiet gaps between Scott Peterson's words and his actions, in the spaces where a grieving husband was expected to be, and where investigators believed he was not. Long before the ocean returned Laci and her unborn son, detectives were already mapping a timeline that pointed away from accident and toward intent. On the morning Laci disappeared, Scott told police he had gone fishing alone at the Berkeley Marina. He described calm water, a brief outing, nothing remarkable. But nothing about the trip aligned with the life he claimed to be living. Laci was 8 months pregnant. Christmas Eve plans had been discussed. Family members expected her presence. Yet Scott left her behind, traveled nearly 90 miles, and chose a body of water known for its depth, currents, and difficulty of recovery. Investigators took notice immediately. Receipts placed Scott at the marina. Surveillance footage confirmed his presence. Witnesses recalled seeing him alone, launching a small boat into the cold bay. The same bay where, months later, Laci's remains would surface. It was not proof of murder, but it was coincidence layered upon coincidence, stacking into something heavier. As police dug deeper, they uncovered a parallel life Scott had been carefully maintaining. An extramarital affair revealed a man presenting himself as unencumbered, unattached, grieving the loss of a wife who was still alive. Phone calls captured him standing near the Eiffel Tower, while actually attending a vigil for his missing pregnant wife. Each revelation chipped away at the image of an innocent man awaiting his family's return. The defense would later argue that moral failure was not murder. And they were correct on paper. But motive does not need to shout. Sometimes it whispers through patterns, through choices, through lies told long before a crime is discovered. When Laci's remains were found, the prosecution believed the final piece had fallen into place. The location was devastatingly precise. The condition of the bodies, though tragic and obscured by water, matched the timeline prosecutors had built. The unborn child, Connor, was carried by currents separate from his mother, a detail consistent with prolonged submersion rather than sudden animal attack. Still, the ocean left room for argument. The defense seized on the uncertainty of forensic conclusions. They pointed to missing limbs, exposed bones, and damage consistent with marine scavenging. Experts acknowledged that sharks and other sea life could interact with a body after death. This was not disputed. What was disputed was implication. The defense stretched post-mortem interaction into something far more provocative, an implied alternative cause of death. But investigators pushed back. No evidence suggested Laci entered the water alive. No blood in the boat. No signs of struggle along the shoreline. No eyewitness accounts of an attack. And crucially, no historical record of fatal shark attacks in that part of the bay during the relevant period. The theory explained decomposition, not disappearance. In court, jurors were asked to choose between competing narratives. One told a story of planning, deception, and disposal. The other relied on the vast unpredictability of nature and the absence of definitive cause. It was not a question of what could happen in the ocean, but what was most consistent with human behavior and evidence. Midway through this unraveling, public opinion fractured. Some saw Scott Peterson as a man wrongfully accused by circumstance and sensational media coverage. Others saw him as chillingly detached, calculating, and aware long before anyone else that Laci would never come home. The shark theory became a rallying point for doubt, shared widely, often stripped of its original forensic context. If this case is forcing you to confront how fragile truth can become when evidence is incomplete, take a moment to support Dark Crime Box. Like this video, share it, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Every interaction helps keep these deeply researched stories alive. Behind the scenes, prosecutors stayed focused. They argued that crimes do not require perfect evidence, only coherent ones. Scott's lies about his affair, his behavior after Laci vanished, his sudden interest in selling her vehicle and house, his calm demeanor during moments of supposed desperation. These details, they claimed, formed a psychological profile incompatible with innocence. The defense continued to emphasize what could not be proven. They reminded jurors that no murder weapon was found. No eyewitness saw Scott harm Laci. No autopsy could pinpoint how she died. In that vacuum, they invited alternative explanations to bloom. But investigators returned to one immovable fact. Scott Peterson went fishing alone on Christmas Eve. And months later, the bodies of his wife and unborn child surfaced in the same waters. Nature did not explain that alignment. The ocean may destroy evidence, but it does not create alibis. It does not fabricate lies, and it does not make phone calls to secret lovers. The prosecution argued that while the sea altered the bodies, it did not alter the truth of how they arrived there. As the trial moved forward, emotions intensified. Laci's family watched as her final days were dissected, debated, and reframed. The defense's theories, particularly the suggestion of animal involvement, felt to them like another erasure of her humanity. She was becoming a forensic argument rather than a woman, a daughter, a mother-to-be. And yet, the justice system demands distance. It demands that jurors separate grief from guilt, probability from proof. By the time closing arguments approached, the case had become more than a question of murder. It was a referendum on how society interprets circumstantial evidence, how much doubt is enough, and whether absence can outweigh pattern. As this chapter closes, one truth remains unavoidable. The shark theory did not emerge from evidence of attack, but from the silence left behind by water and time. In the next chapter, that silence will collide with the voices of those left behind. Laci's family, a shaken community, and a public still divided by what they believe justice looks like. And as you reflect on what you've heard so far, consider this. When uncertainty exists, does it protect the innocent or provide refuge for the guilty? Stay with Dark Crime Box. Like, share, subscribe. By the time the courtroom fell silent and the verdict was read, the story of Laci Peterson had already escaped the walls meant to contain it. It had become something larger than a single crime, larger than a single man. It was now a case shaped by grief, doubt, media saturation, and a haunting claim that refused to disappear beneath the surface. Scott Peterson was found guilty. The jury weighed the circumstantial evidence, the lies, the movements, the patterns, and the location where the bodies were found. They did not find reasonable doubt where the defense insisted it lived. To them, the absence of a definitive cause of death did not erase the presence of intent. The ocean may have obscured details, but it had not erased accountability. For Laci's family, the verdict was not closure. It was survival. No ruling could restore what had been taken. No sentence could rewrite the future that vanished with her. What remained was the burden of listening, again and again, to theories that reframed her death as accident, misfortune, or nature's cruelty rather than human choice. The shark claim lingered long after the trial ended. It surfaced in appeals, documentaries, online forums, and whispered conversations among those convinced that doubt alone should undo a conviction. For some, it became a symbol of everything uncertain about the case. For others, it was a distraction, an attempt to redirect attention away from evidence that pointed steadily in one direction. Experts continued to clarify what the courtroom had already acknowledged. Marine activity can alter a body. Water can erase trauma. Time can dissolve answers. But none of that places a pregnant woman into a freezing bay on Christmas Eve. None of that explains deception before disappearance or indifference after. None of that answers why Scott Peterson told people his wife was dead before anyone else knew she was gone. The ocean did not choose Laci. Years later, her name still carries weight, not because of sharks or speculation or legal arguments, but because she represents a question that society struggles to answer honestly. How much uncertainty are we willing to accept before we stop calling something justice? And how often do alternative theories exist not to reveal truth, but to make it easier to look away from it? If this story has stayed with you, if it has unsettled you, challenged you, or forced you to reconsider what you believe about evidence and doubt, support Dark Crime Box. Like this video, share it with others who value serious true crime storytelling, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so these stories continue to be told with care and depth. Laci Peterson was more than a case file, more than a courtroom argument, more than a theory debated online. She was a woman who should have come home, a mother who never held her child. And when the water finally returned her, it did not deliver answers, only reminders of what was lost. The sea may have taken the evidence, but it did not take responsibility. That burden remains with those who live on land. And as this story ends, one question remains, echoing long after the tide has receded. When doubt is louder than truth, who does it really protect?